Welcome back to News Talk. Coming up for you later this half hour, we'll talk with a local man who was abused by a priest as a child. We'll get his reaction to the Pope's meeting with abuse survivors in Philadelphia. Right now, though, let's get back to our conversation with D.C. Councilman Kenyon McDuffie. He is chairman of the Panels Committee on the Judiciary, and we've got more opportunity for you to join the conversation. We've been talking about the city's response to the crime situation, also the ambulance challenge the city is facing right now. If you have questions or comments for Councilman McDuffie, join us by dialing the number on your screen. As I mentioned before, we can take calls in the 11 a.m. hour. So if that's when you're watching and you wish to join the Q&A, wish to join the dialogue, dial in. We'll go to the phones as your questions and comments come in at 703-387-1020. We talked earlier about the fire chief's desire to have private ambulance service supplant or to augment the D.C. Fire and Rescue personnel and units because so many calls for service are coming in right now. That would be a great temporary strategy if the number of calls for service drops to more normal levels. I would presume it's no one's idea of a permanent fix.
Well, you know, that's the question that I asked. It's the question that some of my colleagues asked at the Mayor Council breakfast yesterday when Chief Dean and the Mayor Bowser presented. Now, I think there are some who like for it to be a temporary fix, but when you look at Seattle, just as an example, in their fire department, it's a location where Chief Dean came to the district from. They've had a third-party contractor system in place for nearly 40 years. And so I'm not so sure that it is a short-term solution. I think ultimately, Bruce, what residents of the District of Columbia want and they deserve, as well as every visitor to the District of Columbia, is to get the highest quality emergency medical services possible. And so whether or not that means having a third-party contractor in place for a year or 3 or for however long it takes to make sure that we ensure top-notch EMS service, we need to make sure that we do that. All things considered, making sure that we control for costs and other things.
Is anyone looking at the calls that come in to make sure that folks are not using the ambulance as a taxi?
It's a huge issue. It's a huge issue. It's one of the things that we talked about most yesterday was trying to make sure that there are other options in place to try to avoid people calling 911 and tying up the ambulances for things that they should be going to their primary care physician for.
Or calling a cab. I mean, if you have a routine appointment at a hospital, you should not be calling the ambulance to get there. Is that?
You're absolutely not. And I think that's one of the things that we've seen that's been such a huge problem. Nearly half of all the calls that we've seen come into the District of Columbia through our 911 system this year have been for basic medical needs and not for the really serious and emergent needs that we'd like to be able to use those resources for.
And as we found out tragically just recently, when ambulances are not available and that crisis call comes in, an infant in distress, that the tying up of a unit for something that is not life or death can be tragic, can absolutely be tragic.
Absolutely. And those are precisely the types of things that we want to avoid and that Chief Dean wants to avoid. And even something, you know, to the extent that you have all of these units that we have, and we've got about 49 that are staffed. We've got about 63 units, 49 of which were staffed. And part of the problem was previously we only had 39 units on the street staff. Now we've got more, according to the chief, on the streets right now. But every time you have all these units out, and they're responding to those calls, particularly those low-level basic emergency calls, then you've got a unit that can't be in the shop getting the preventative maintenance that it needs to stay on the street. And so it's sort of a circular issue that we're facing right now. But the volume of calls that we're getting, particularly for those calls where people should be taking a cab to an appointment or not calling 911 or going to see their primary health care physician, it has taken a unit off the street that ultimately is going to be worn down and have to be replaced.
And I'm sure that the folks who have the very difficult frontline decision-making job are very reluctant to press the issue because, heaven forbid, something happens, they're the ones on the news with all the shame and all the rest of it.
Absolutely. And a lot of the focus that we had yesterday was on vehicles and apparatus and bringing in a third-party contractor potentially. And we're going to have a hearing on this. Actually, we're going to have a discussion on tomorrow about some of these issues. But the other piece that's going to be critically important that we're also going to be talking about tomorrow is the Office of Unified Communications and their responsibility where you have the 911 call takers and making sure that they're taking the calls, they're screening the calls properly, and they're dispatching the calls in a timely manner. So those agencies, the Office of Unified Communications and our fire and emergency medical services work hand in hand. and there needs to be better coordination there, and so we want to talk to the chief and others about that.
I want to go back to the discussion we had at the outset where we were talking about the city's response to the surge in crime that we've seen and that other cities are seeing as well. Taking at face value and accepting your sense of what some of the long-term challenges are and the role they play and in the crime spike that we've seen, sadly, a lot of those issues are not new. Does part of you still wonder why now? What's going on to cause crime to rise now?
Sure.
Whether it's guns, the availability of guns, these drugs that are out there now, or just what is going on?
Sure.
Again, why now?
Absolutely, and it's tough to pinpoint a single reason why things are happening. I think if you look at the violence more comprehensively, what we're trying to do, then you recognize that there are a number of things that are contributing to it. You've heard the chief talk about the accessibility of guns with high-capacity magazines. You've heard her talk about some of the neighborhood beefs that are occurring. You've heard her talk about a host of things, but you've also heard her say we cannot arrest our way out of this problem, and that we can't lean solely on law enforcement to solve the crime problem that we're facing, which is why we're taking this approach that really is a multi-system approach that focuses more on prevention and intervention. It focuses on pairing up resources with communities and disrupting the violence that's occurring, at the same time working with our health officials and other organizations to make sure we have data-driven solutions in place that are going to help to prevent some of the violence before it ever occurs.
What time did the last witness finally get to speak?
We started at 5 p.m. And I think I gavelled at 3:21 a.m.
What does that say to you? That's an extraordinary...
Well, it demonstrates the public's commitment to this issue. It demonstrates my colleagues, some of whom stayed the entire time, their commitment to this issue.
Let's praise those who did. Do you recall?
Well, yeah, sure. We had Yvette Alexander who was there. We had Alyssa Silverman who was there as well. I believe Charles Allen was there for a while as well. Anita Bonds, but I will tell you this. 11 of the 13 council members were there for nearly the entire time. And more importantly than the council members who are paid to have these oversight hearings, the public. We had senior citizens who were there to present testimony on this very critical issue at 1, 2, 3 in the morning. And I think it demonstrated everybody's commitment to trying to solve an age-old problem, but do it in ways that are innovative and put forth solutions that are creative and that are going to be sustainable. That is the issue. We've seen some of these initiatives take place, Bruce, over the years, and they've been starts and stops. We want to put in place an infrastructure that's going to be sustainable and it goes beyond political administration. I
want to broach one issue with you that is not part of your committee work and may not be in your district, in your ward. I don't actually know, but what we're seeing on the blue, orange, and silver lines, where service is being reduced and trains. Orange and Silver Line trains are not even going to be stopping at Stadium Armory. That may be Ward 6. I don't know.
It is Ward 6.
So, do you have any thoughts on that? Clearly, Metro is dealing with a challenge not of their making because of this transformer, this power substation fire, and the lengthy process now for going forward and getting it
I have
fixed.
A couple of thoughts on that, Bruce. But before, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that Ward 8 council member LaRuby May, where we're seeing most of the violence, she was actually there probably the longest after me, and she actually helped to co-chair it when I had to step away. So I wanted to make sure that folks know that LaRuby May from Ward 8 was there for a really long time. In terms of Metro, it is not Ward 5, it's Ward 6. I've talked to Councilmember Allen, who represents the area. I've talked to some of my other colleagues. Quite frankly, I've got a huge problem with this. You're talking about bypassing a station where a lot of students utilize that station for Eastern High School and some of the other schools in the area. You've got our jail over there. You've got a homeless shelter over there. You have all these assets, and people need that station to be open. And then one of the things that adds insult to injury is that they're bypassing the station during peak hours, but they aren't changing the fares for people who are paying peak hour prices. And so we really need some really solid, strong, permanent leadership at WMATA, because you talk about a snowball effect. We're seeing one thing after another, and we really need leadership there that's going to get a handle on this and give riders who are paying a premium more confidence in the system.
And there's talk that this could go on for quite a long time.
We're hopeful that it won't, but there's talk about it.
Councilman McDuffie, thanks very much for your time. We really appreciate
Always
the
a
chance
pleasure,
to speak
Bruce.
with you. Thanks very much. When we return, the Pope meets with victims of the church sex abuse scandal. Keep it here.